That day, the sky seemed clearer than usual, as if it were clearing a path for something I didn't yet know was about to happen. I was sitting on my usual bench in front of Evelyn's bakery, holding the same book, trying to focus on words I'd already read 3 times without taking in a single line. My eyes, though, were restless, scanning the square without a clear purpose. And that's when he appeared, as if he didn't belong to this place, as if he belonged to a story unwritten in the scriptures my father preached every Sunday with fervor. A tall man with stubble, a lingering gaze, and a presence that seemed to shift the air around him, like a fresh breeze slipping through a forgotten window. He carried an old backpack, a notebook stained with ink, and a smile too easy for someone clearly carrying storms in his chest. And yet, when he sat on the ground and began drawing a child playing with pigeons, everyone there, including me, was captivated as if the world had paused to listen to him without him uttering a single word. My name is Clara Bell. I was born and raised under the roof of Pastor Elias's prayers. My life was always a straight line: church, school, helping with services, caring for my mother, reading my books, and avoiding anything that could tarnish my reputation or his. The town knew me as Sweet Clara, the girl with the calm smile, the daughter every mother wished for. But there were parts of me no one ever saw. Thoughts kept like letters never sent, desires whispered in the dead of night, and a constant feeling that I was living an incomplete version of myself. I didn't know how to name it until he showed up, until that stranger looked at me in a way no one had ever dared, as if he saw what I hid even from God. And maybe that's why, despite knowing he was everything my father would disapprove of, I couldn't look away. For the first time, someone seemed to see me not as an example, but as a woman. It was on the 3rd day that he finally spoke to me. I was leaving Mrs. Bethany's flower shop with a simple bouquet of lavender, flowers that always calmed me more than the words I heard from the pulpit, when he stopped me with a comment as unexpected as it was disarming. "Did you know your smile appears before you do?" My first instinct was to retreat, to raise the invisible armor of a well-behaved pastor's daughter, thank him politely, and move on. But there was something in his tone. It wasn't crude. It wasn't arrogant. It was genuine curiosity, as if he were simply trying to understand a detail of the world, and in that moment that detail was me. I stood there frozen, flowers in hand, heart racing for a reason my logic couldn't explain. He smiled, not the ready smile he gave to children or the elderly charmed by his drawings in the square, but a small, almost shy smile, as if he wasn't sure it was welcome. And then, perhaps unintentionally, I smiled back. It was just a moment, a silent exchange, but I knew something had started there, something that couldn't be undone. In the days that followed, I began to observe him more closely, not as a watcher, but as someone trying to piece together a puzzle. He was a walking mystery. He talked to everyone but rarely about himself. He drew everyday scenes with absurd sensitivity, as if he saw beauty where the rest of the world saw only routine. A child playing alone, an old man reading the newspaper, in silence, a dog sleeping in the shade of the newsstand. He captured everything, and somehow he captured me too. And the more he looked at me, the more I felt the defenses I'd built over years becoming fragile. As if an inner wind was starting to push open the windows I'd kept locked for so long. Part of me wanted to tell someone, to confess the whirlwind forming inside me. But what could I say? That I was being touched by a man whose full name I didn't even know. That he was shaking my faith, my image, everything I'd learned about right and wrong. At home, I pretended normalcy. In church, I recited hymns with the same sweetness as always. But inside, a silent war was being waged, and every time he looked at me, every time we exchanged subtle words, sometimes about flowers, sometimes about books, sometimes about nothing, I lost a little more of that perfect girl, and without realizing it, I drew closer to the woman I didn't yet know I could be. It was on a Saturday afternoon that everything changed. The kind of afternoon where the sun seems too tired to shine brightly, and the whole town slumbers under a blanket of laziness and silence. I was alone in the church, arranging the pews for Sunday service. I love that place when it's empty. No voices, no eyes, just me, the colored stained glass windows, and the sound of my own thoughts. And maybe that's why I let myself sing. Softly, an old melody, one I learned from my mother before I could even write. I never sang in public, but there, I felt safe, invisible, or so I thought. The sound of footsteps broke the final note. I turned, startled, heart leaping, and there he was, standing at the entrance with that same intense, curious gaze. He didn't say anything at first, just walked to the last pew and sat, as if that were the most natural place in the world to be. I, nervous, tried to cover it up, gathering pamphlets, straightening cushions, doing anything to avoid facing him. But then he spoke, and it wasn't about flowers or books or any triviality that might have given me a polite escape. He said, "I never imagined someone surrounded by faith could sing with such sadness." The words hit me like a blow, because they were true, because he saw, and because no one had ever dared say it out loud. It was as if he'd torn off a veil I'd placed over my face years ago, and for the first time, I didn't know how to respond. I stood there, hands trembling, chest full of questions I'd avoided asking myself. Who was I when no one was watching? Why did those words hurt more than any sermon I'd ever heard? And why did he, of all people, see me so clearly? That was the moment I felt it, understood it, accepted it. He wasn't just stealing smiles around town. He was stealing my silence, my certainties. He was invading spaces within me I didn't even know existed. And as much as everything in me screamed to keep my distance, something deeper, something that didn't come from reason or the faith taught in church pews, said it was too late. Something inside me had already been taken, and part of me didn't want it back. It was after that day in the church that our words stopped being casual. What had been sporadic meetings and stolen glances turned into a series of conversations that seemed unwilling to end. I don't know exactly when. I started searching for him with my eyes every time I left the house. I only know that when I didn't see him, something inside me wilted a little, and when I found him, a simple nod, a discreet smile, was enough to make the whole world feel right again. At first we spoke in public places with some caution. At the market by the fruit stand, at the gazebo in the square, where he sketched strangers' faces and pretended not to notice me. But little by little, like someone pushing a door already ajar, we grew closer. He told me his name was Jonah. He had no family nearby, lived off selling his illustrations and small jobs that came up here and there. He spoke little of his past, but when he did, his words carried a mix of longing and pain, like someone who'd lost more than they could bear, but learned to smile over the ruins. He told me about cities he'd passed through, people who inspired his drawings, nights he slept under the stars with just a blanket and faith that the next day would bring something better. And when he listened to me, he did so with an almost sacred attention, as if every word I spoke were a revealed secret, a treasure he'd guard carefully. For the first time, I felt heard, not judged, not guided, just heard. But it didn't take long for the looks to start. The townspeople, used to seeing me as an example, as the pastor's daughter, began to whisper. A word here, another there, always cloaked in false smiles and questions disguised as concern. My mother called me for a talk, trying to hide her worry behind a gentle voice. My father. Oh, my father. The moment he heard Jonah's name, his demeanor changed. He called Jonah a restless spirit, said men like him brought trouble, and told me to keep my distance. You know who you are, Clara, he said. You know what's expected of you. And in that moment I realized that sentence had never felt so heavy, because yes, I knew who I was. But maybe, for the first time, I was starting to discover who I wanted to be, and the more they tried to pull me away from him, the more my heart rebelled. Because Jonah didn't just teach me to smile again. He showed me a mirror where I didn't see just the exemplary daughter, but the woman growing silently, suffocated by expectations I hadn't chosen. He saw me, and even without promising anything, without swearing eternities, he did something no one else could. He made me feel whole. Summer arrived with its slow afternoons, and with it, the sense that everything around me was divided into before and after Jonah. Our meetings became more frequent, not always planned, but increasingly inevitable. Sometimes he'd show up with a drawing of me, done from memory, capturing details I didn't even know I carried in my face. Other times, we'd just walk side by side, saying little, because with him, even silence was comfortable. But at some point in that hot season, something shifted. What had been light began to gain weight. A sweet weight, but undeniable. And with it came the dilemmas I'd spent years avoiding. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about me, about us, about everything I'd have to lose to live something that, until then, existed only in thoughts murmured on sleepless nights. It was on a Wednesday night, after choir practice, that I came home later and found him leaning against the church garden fence. He didn't smile. He just looked at me, as if deciding between leaving or saying everything at once, and he said it. He told me he was thinking of leaving, that he'd been invited to exhibit his drawings in a distant city, that the life he used to carry on his back was calling again. And as he said all this, his eyes said something else. They said he wanted to stay, that if I gave him a reason, he'd leave everything behind. But I froze. The words wouldn't come. My mind, trained for years to think before feeling, to please before choosing, went silent. And he, with the graceful sadness of someone who'd already expected the absence of an answer, just lowered his head, brushed my hand lightly with his fingers and said, "You don't have to say anything. Sometimes silence says it all." Left that same week, and I stayed. I stayed with the emptiness of someone who didn't have the courage to fight, with the relieved looks of those who thought I'd returned to the right path, with sermons about patience, submission, and divine will. But none of it healed the hole Jonah left, because he didn't just take my smile. He took my restlessness, my hunger for life, and everything I'd hidden from myself for so long. And deep down, I knew he only left because I didn't go with him. Because in that moment when I could have chosen risk, I chose obedience. And that's when I began to understand that sometimes the greatest theft isn't what someone else does. It's what we let slip away out of fear of being who we truly are. They say time has a curious way of healing, but I learned it doesn't heal. It just rearranges the pain, tucking it into places where we can carry it without letting it show. Jonah's absence became a silent constant in my days. I went back to my routine: flowers on Saturday mornings, services on Sundays, family lunches full of talk about things that didn't really matter. I smiled at people again, sang in rehearsals, said yes kindly to everything asked of me. But inside, something had broken. Not like a shattered glass, but like a door that opens and can't be closed again. I began to change subtly. I read different books, visited places where he used to draw. I even started drawing, not anything like what he did, but it was my attempt to keep alive what he'd awakened in me. a desire for expression, for freedom, for voice. And for the first time, I began to write. Short fragments, loose sentences. In a notebook I bought in secret, I wrote, "I don't want to be everyone else's favorite version anymore. I want to be mine." I read it aloud one night and cried like a child, because deep down, I'd never said anything so true about myself. That's when I realized Jonah didn't come to pull me off my path. He came to show me there was another, that I could choose, and that this choice, though difficult, lonely, and full of doubts, was mine. I started talking to my mother differently, more openly, less polished. My father, of course, resisted. He said I was different, and I was. I didn't bow as much anymore. I didn't lower my eyes, and even trembling inside, I said what I thought, with respect, but without backing down. And that, for me, was the greatest miracle of all. It was during a service, weeks later, that I understood more clearly. The sermon was about the prodigal son, about leaving and returning, about forgiveness, return, and unconditional love. But for the first time, I heard it differently. I thought that maybe sometimes the real departure isn't away from home, but into yourself. And the real return is the one where you come back to what you should have been from the start. And it was with that certainty, small, fragile, but alive, that I made the decision that would change everything. It was on an ordinary morning that everything began again. One of those mornings where you wake up expecting nothing, but fate, silently, has already set everything in motion. I was, at the town library, one of my favorite escapes since Jonah left. The librarian, a kind woman named Miriam, came to me with a brown envelope. She said someone had left it there, with my name handwritten, and handed it to me with a smile that seemed to know more than it let on. The paper was thick, textured, and inside was just a drawing, me sitting on the square's bench, holding a bouquet of lavender. The precision of the lines, the tenderness of the portrayed gaze, it was him. No doubt, it was him. And with the drawing, a single sentence written below in firm letters. I still see you in everything that inspires me. My heart raced with a force I hadn't felt in a long time. A mix of shock, longing, and something I thought I'd lost. Hope. I ran out of the library without even knowing where I was going, as if my body knew the path my mind was still trying to find. And there he was, leaning against the lamppost on the corner just like the first time. Thinner, more serious, but still with that same gaze that disarmed me from within. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at me, and in that look was everything. The time that had passed, what was left unresolved, what still hurt, and what, despite it all, survived. He approached slowly, and when I stopped in front of him, Jonah smiled. A smile without hurry, without tricks, just sincere. I wanted to say so many things, but he spoke first. "This time, I'm only coming back if you come with me." It wasn't a request. It was a choice, an open door, and I, with my heart burning and hands trembling, finally understood what I needed to do. There was no erasing the past, not the mistakes, not the silences. But there in front of me was a chance to start again. Not as the pastor's daughter hiding behind standards, but as Clara, whole, imperfect, mine. I took his hand, not with fear, not with doubt, but with the certainty of someone who, finally, chose herself, and so without fanfare, without witnesses, without solemn promises, I went with him. Because sometimes the real miracle isn't someone loving us, it's having the courage to let ourselves be loved the right way. The years passed like leaves carried by a gentle breeze. The town stayed the same size, with the same clocks, the same hurried smiles, and the same benches in the square. But I was no longer the same. Today, I look back with tenderness, not regret. I understood that sometimes you have to lose your footing to find your own path. And mine, as unlikely as it seemed, began the moment I decided not to please the world, but to finally live. Jonah and I didn't build a perfect story, but we built a real one. With pauses, restarts, and many silences full of meaning. We kept traveling, drawing, writing, and every time he finishes a portrait, he still tells me, "It's your smile that still guides my hand."